In early 2001, Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán, a Mexican drug dealer known as El Chapo, decided he no longer wanted to be in prison. He had been at Puente Grande, a high-security prison near Guadalajara, since 1995, after being locked up for his part in a violent shootout at the airport in 1993. While in prison, he lived relatively well, enjoying good food, women, volleyball, and the comfort of sleeping in the same place every night. This was largely due to Damaso Lopez Nunez, the deputy director of security, who made sure El Chapo's needs were met. El Chapo gave Damaso money and gifts, including $10,000 in cash and a house. He even paid for Damaso's child's medical bills when the child was hurt. Damaso later said, "When I needed anything, I would ask, and he would give it to me." Unfortunately for El Chapo, Damaso left the prison in late 2000 amid suspicions of corruption. On January 18, 2001, everything changed for El Chapo when the Supreme Court of Mexico ruled that the United States could extradite Mexican prisoners such as El Chapo as long as the death penalty was taken off the table. His worst fear, a cell in an American prison, was suddenly much closer to reality. A vendor in Sinaloa, El Chapo's birthplace in Mexico, shortly before he was sentenced in 2019, reported that the next day he left, smuggled out the door tucked into a laundry cart rolled to freedom by a guard known as El Chio, and nobody saw fit to stop him. In the book, Narcoland, journalist Anibal Hernandez argues that the laundry cart story was a tall tale concocted in the wake of the escape to hide the real story, that El Chapo had simply walked out the door. Others have joined Hernandez in speculating that the laundry cart story was a fanciful tale concocted to cover up a more mundane escape made possible by systemic corruption. Years later, when El Chapo was finally put on trial in a U.S. federal court in Brooklyn, the laundry cart theory was retold repeatedly by multiple former accomplices. Regardless of whether El Chapo was rolled out or walked out in a stolen guard uniform, it was his ability to buy the right people that allowed him to escape. El Chapo was back within days, holding a series of meetings with his partners, including the man who, in the ensuing years, would become his most steadfast ally, Ismael Elmo Zambada Garcia. At one of the first meetings at a lieutenant's ranch, Elmo made it clear that he was backing El Chapo to the hilt. "I'm with you 100%, Elmo said. "I'm going to help you with anything you need, and any kilo of coke that I receive from Colombia, I'm going to give you half. So for now, just take care of yourself and stay in hiding." But the question was, where? El Chapo was traveling with a hard-to-conceal entourage of armed men, and his face was plastered across televisions and newspapers all over Mexico. Where could he lay low without attracting attention? Elmo had an idea. "Let's go to Sinaloa," Elmo said. "Let's go back to your native lands." Perched atop a peak that looms over La Tuna, a rain of cypress trees sits like a crown, blowing faintly in the breeze. From below, across the valley, the trees are all you can see of El Cielo, or the heavens, the home El Chapo built for himself. It's a sanctuary he never got to truly enjoy, but which he visited from time to time, sneaking back into his hometown to throw a party or visit his mother. It sits unoccupied now, with El Chapo serving a life sentence at a supermax federal prison in Colorado. It's unlikely he'll ever set foot here again, but don't tell his mother that. The family once threw out a television reporter who had the temerity to ask Belma Consuelo directly how she felt about her son spending the rest of his life in prison. If he were to get out of prison, however, he might want to head to this mountaintop retreat. Indeed, when he escaped from Puente Grande prison in January 2001, it was to El Cielo that El Chapo returned to plot his new empire and to see his mom. Things were looking good for him then. He was free, back in the mountains where he had grown up and gotten his start, where much of the population loved and supported him, and where the remoteness and rugged terrain provided a natural defense that allowed him to move about with relative ease. He was moving cocaine again, as well as marijuana and heroin. There was always more money to be made in cocaine, but the local economy of his sanctuary still relied heavily on the production of those two trusty cash crops, the hills dotted with red poppy flowers and resilient stalks of cannabis. By purchasing these drugs from local farmers, He could make a handsome profit, prop up local businesses, and buy an enduring base of support. Who's going to turn on the guy who pays wholesale for their crops? Among the farmers El Chapo bought from in those days was a man named Jose, an affable father of three, born, raised, and still living in a small town just off the highway. Names marked with an asterisk are pseudonyms. Like El Chapo, Jose and his neighbors learned how to grow weed and opium from their fathers, using tried and true methods to cultivate the crops on little plots of land in the hills above their village. In the early 2000s, Jose was working an area of land roughly equal to the size of about 5 football fields. The area was under the protection or control of El Chapo, to whom Jose and other growers paid a 30% tax in exchange for protection from soldiers who might otherwise raid the area, burning crops and sending months of work up in smoke. For several years after the escape from Puente Grande, Jose did not meet the man to whom he paid taxes, but that finally changed in 2005. Short on funds, he decided he wanted to make a proposition. A friend agreed to make the introduction, and they drove together up the highway, onto the dirt road, and into La Tuna. When El Chapo received them, Jose made his proposal. What if El Chapo covered the expense of planting, and then we split the eventual profit 50-50? El Chapo readily agreed. That's just the kind of guy he was, Jose recalled. He was a very simple man and very natural, Jose said. You just felt like talking to him. I never found him to be aggressive. The relationship between trafficker strawmen and the people who grow opium and weed is rarely an even one and can sometimes be downright feudal. Growers rarely have much choice in whom they sell to, so the buyers are able to set the asking price. The exchange is one of constant negotiation and often features a certain degree of coercion, whether through the direct threat or delivery of violence, or through the local boss withdrawing his protection and opening the farmer up to the full fury of a state that is technically dedicated to wiping out the farmer's livelihood. Jose and others in the highlands of Sinaloa remember the time right after El Chapo's escape as a golden age. During this period, everyone knew who was in charge, and you could look the boss in the eye, make a deal, and have a friendly chat. El Chapo often paid Jose, who played in a band in his free time, to perform at his parties. It felt good to be around someone like El Chapo, Jose said. He is seen as a great man here, a true legend. It was a privilege to talk to him and have a friendship with him. Even if Jose was giving a nicer version for reporters, many people in the Bataguas Mountains only saw this generous side of El Chapo, the kind local leader. This area of Sinaloa was mostly safe from the violence that affected other parts of Mexico due to the drug trade. When violence did happen, it usually came from the government rather than from hitmen. However, while El Chapo was spreading goodwill in his hometown and nearby villages, he and his allies were causing violence elsewhere. When he returned to La Tuna in 2001 to rebuild his empire, he was determined to seek revenge.